Okay, I think we're going to make a start now. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. We've got quite a lovely long list of people, I think, joining us from across the world, which is super exciting. So it's part of the ambition for this project to be kind of seriously local and massively international. And hopefully we'll have achieved that with this talk. So just to introduce myself, my name is Jes Fernie. I am an independent curator and writer. I'm actually based in the UK, but I've been working with Lund Cathedral and white architecture for the past 8 years on this project. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion, which I think is going to raise a whole load of really, I don't know, pertinent, interesting, possibly even slightly strange issues that we're all kind of thinking about in this very strange moment we find ourselves in. But before I give a very brief overview of the Råängen programme and what we've been doing, I just want to say hello to our speakers. First of all, Tor Lindstrand. Tor, hello. Lovely to see you. Tor is an architect, a lecturer, and an AI specialist. We've actually just given Tor that title, the AI specialist bit, and he kind of fought it a bit, but now you've got to own it now, I think. This conversation has given you that title. And Lena Sjöstrand, the chaplain at Lund Cathedral, and the co-director along with Mats Pearson of the Råängen programme. And I have to say the driving force behind the project as a whole, along with Jake Ford and Åsa Berndell of White Architecture. Jake's actually the person who got Tor involved, so props to Jake too. He's working behind the scenes. And Mia Engberg, filmmaker and screen director. Thank you so much for joining us and to agreeing to be part of this, Mia. I know our email came somewhat out of the blue after Lena had seen your films, and it's just really lovely that you could join us. Mia's known for her atmospheric and kind of searching films such as Belleville Baby and Hypermoon. And I understand you have a new book out this week about darkness, which seems very exciting. So welcome to you all. And yeah, I appreciate that all of you will not be speaking in your own language, and I am. So I just need to recognize that. And there are many people joining us from across the world who obviously their first language won't be English. So just to give you a little bit of context for this conversation, I am going to take you through some slides, some images of activities and commissions and ambitions that we've been working on over the last 7 years. The project began 7 years ago in 2017. It's kind of incredible to think that 7 years have passed, isn't it, Lena? It's very strange. And when the Lund Cathedral elected to develop a 10-hectare plot of land that they own, it's kind of important part of the narrative, on the outskirts of Lund in South Sweden, which we have now called Råängen, which for non-Swedish speakers, that means raw meadow. And this new neighbourhood will become part of a much bigger urban expansion programme that's led by a whole load of other organisations and institutions such as Lund University and Lund Municipality and the broader Skåne region. And I think what makes this project so unique, and a lot of people have commented on its quite singular character, is that it's both, I guess, a kind of straightforward development programme that's dealing with a kind of expansion of a city, but also it's a platform for discussion about what happens on this plot of land. So we think of it as a kind of laboratory process that involves many different people, including artists and developers and farmers and academics, writers, children, and now filmmakers, very exciting addition. And over the last 7 years, we have commissioned artworks. This is a work by British artist Nathan Coley that we installed. Actually, this is the first one. We installed this right next to the Lund Cathedral as a kind of provocative introduction to the project, which worked quite spectacularly. And this was a work by Nathan too in Råängen that began a discussion about the role of the church in this new neighbourhood. We built a garden called Hage, which translates as garden, working with Brendeland and Christopherson and Price and Myers. Brendeland and Christopherson are Norwegian architects, and Price and Myers are British engineers. And this kind of internationalism is a concerted effort to build on the cathedral's history and the contribution of international craftspeople to the fabric of the cathedral. And this has turned into a kind of public space, meeting point for locals, as well as an event space for community groups, and a curious destination point for people living in the Skåne region and beyond. I think people have picnics there and hang out with their dogs and cats and their animals and things. It's lovely. And much to our surprise, it's won lots of awards. And I think it's become a kind of clear statement of intent by the cathedral, that is the importance of building social space before housing or any other type of infrastructure. And this is the canopy, the very handsome canopy designed by Price and Myers, and the long, beautiful table that reflects the altar at the cathedral and the idea of church as community. And then we've organised many public events and walks and workshops. I love this image of kids basically trashing Haga. It's quite heartening to see. And there's various talks and workshops we've done, and we've commissioned writers to write texts about our projects, and we produce publications which kind of situate, quite importantly, I think, the programme within a critical discourse. It's really a tiny plot of land, but we sort of think of it as the centre of the world. And then we also commission films on the various projects that we've been working on. You can obviously get lots more information from our website. So I'm going to stop screen sharing there, and just to say that a lot of these activities are designed to draw a local and a national and an international residents and conversation with the audience into a discussion about what happens to this place and what it might become. And as Lena, I think you say on many occasions when we meet, and I love it when you say this, we're interested in asking questions rather than providing answers. And I think that links beautifully to the sort of discussion about CGI and AI images. And we've devised this 2,000-year framework for the project, which begins in 1123 with the consecration of the original altar, and then moves on 1,000 years into the present day, and then 1,000 years into the future. So we think of ourselves as kind of halfway through this process, and we have the history of Lund and the cathedral to build on, and to conceive of a future that is 1,000 years off. It's a kind of fantastically freeing mechanism, which is also slightly terrifying, which links to today's discussion, I think. This idea of conceiving of a future is our focus for the next hour. We're going to be talking about how architecture is represented and how this affects the way we perceive and understand our surroundings. And we'll also be thinking about the agency of images and imagery and the longing, anxiety, and hope that comes with our perceptions of the future. And in the project as a whole, I think it's important to say that we've made a conscious effort to resist creating CGI images or architects' renderings of what the Råängen neighbourhood might become. So we prefer to think about realities on the ground. But we thought it might be really interesting to invite an AI specialist to kind of throw us into possible futures, and we invited Tor to do this with us, for us. And Tor's devised a really imaginative process, which he's going to talk about, that involved interviews with all team members, where we were kind of asked to speak from the future, which I just found like a kind of earth-shatteringly brilliant. And I think I'm going to employ it in all sorts of other projects that I do. It was such a great mechanism to kind of have a kind of bodily understanding of what it is you're trying to do, looking back at it from a notional future. And we thought these, when Tor sent us these images, we just thought, God, they're so strange and eerie and perhaps hopeful. We're not quite sure. Maybe we can decide today that maybe they could be useful as a tool. So we organised this talk to kind of kickstart that process. And just to give you an idea of the format for this talk, Tor's going to give us a sort of fly through potted history of representation in architecture, and then take us through the process of making these images. Then Lena and Mia will briefly respond to the provocations in these images, and then we'll all have a conversation between us, and hopefully we'll get a dialogue with you all watching. But if you have any comments you want to make while we're talking, please put them in the chat box. I'll be looking at them throughout the talk. So yeah, we're looking forward to getting your feedback. But let's start with Tor. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jes, for that introduction. Good, I think, for everyone. I don't know how much the audience know about Råängen, but I was very happy to be invited. I've followed the project as many architects have done, and I've been intrigued with the different approach of process and thinking and how to put our artistic projects for and center in thinking about planning. I think it's a really fascinating project. So I've been really happy being part of it a little bit and getting more insights on the way. So I know I want to have this conversation in the end, so I will be as brief as I can or quick as I can with my presentation. So I'll start sharing here. Let's see, here we go. I hope you can all see this, yeah? So to start, well, one important departure point for me is to think about the relationship between representation of space and building space. And I think architecture is kind of located in both. We can say that architecture, well, it's the built environment around us, but the practice of architecture is very much about abstraction through diagrams, through drawings, through images, through sketches, photographs, models. We try to imagine a future, and that could happen on different scales and levels. Often it can be like on planning all the way down to objects that we use, everyday objects that we see around us. And one architect, an American architect called Lebbeus Woods, he was very much into this. He's famous for his experimental and unconventional drawings and imaginations of a future. And I think he sees drawings as a kind of a resistance and an opportunity to reimagine the world around us and think about them. So it's a kind of a subversive activity. When we think about conventional architecture drawings, they are mostly about pursuing a goal. We want to have this built, so we make the drawings and the imagery and so on in order to make that will be materialized in the world. I think Lebbeus Woods, it was more about making ideas, so to mobilize a way of thinking. And of course, Lebbeus Woods is not the only architect that has been thinking about that, but it's a core, you could say a core running through architecture practice. So if we think about where is the starting point of the modern architects as we think of them today, I would say we can locate that in many different places in the world. But one important part is like the mid-15th century in Italy. And it comes back to back with the invention of the linear perspective. So suddenly there was a way to project on a two-dimensional surface and like an illusion of three-dimensional space. And that became like a knowledge to learn. It was a skill and a craft, and it took quite a long time to get adjusted to that and to know how to create images through this technique. But it was very much a technique. And today, when we see photographs or films or any image around us, we immediately sort of understand how this is organized. But in the early days, when linear perspective was introduced, it was a great difficulty to read and understand this kind of imagery. It wasn't taken for granted, so it wasn't like you just immediately jumped in this space. So it was a very important moment where sort of ideas of buildings, we could suddenly move into spaces that was not around us, I would say. So this is an important part. I will speed run through this kind of history. Another technology that came a couple of 100 years later was photography, which also I think changed and transformed architecture, but perhaps not in the same way, but in the way that suddenly the everyday around us could be something that we could look at. And imagery in the early days of photography is often very empty of people. And that had to do with technological limitations. The speed shutter had to be open for such a long time. So people moving past, they sort of didn't register on these kind of early images. Often they were taken outside because you needed a lot of light, and daylight was that source. So you have this kind of strange connection here with the early linear perspectives that was also empty, where you sort of invited people in, and photography that also started empty. But of course, it also became something where you could perceive and observe and think and critically reflect on our surroundings. It also became a way how to disseminate ideas. Suddenly, you could sit in Stockholm and think about Paris, or be in Paris. And of course, that was further emphasized when filmmaking came a couple of decades later. Then architects have always been using imagery and even prototypes and models in different ways. So this is an example of Hannes Meyer, who was the head of the Bauhaus school, and he created this image where he built up a little set, you could say almost like a theater piece, that was supposed to, it came with an essay he wrote that's called Die Neue Welt, where he tried to imagine a new world. So this was the kind of an apartment of the future, an apartment for the workers of the future, imagine with a few objects and compositions. And this was also disseminated and spread and discussed and had quite a big impact on architecture. Similar, but a bit later, this is an example. This is an image of a model, but the model was built in a mirror box, and you were taking photographs from one side, which has the kind of spyglass mirror. So you look in and you see like an expanded, like it becomes an infinity world, and that became the starting point for a project, or became a way to explain a project by Archizoom in the 70s, of thinking about a future where we all live inside kind of a office supermarket space, and where people are engaged in just reorganizing their living environment. So everyone is an interior architecture in this future, and the architecture we are in is spreading to the horizon in all directions, and we just organize our lives the best we can, and the structure provides everything we need in terms of climate, shelter, food, and resources, and so on. So it's a kind of a, I don't know, it's like a utopian, dystopian way. It's a way to think, is this what we want? Is this where architecture is going? So here again, architecture imagery is not only used in order to convince someone to build a certain future, but rather to ask questions about where are we going, where are we heading. And for this project, I have been using AI, and I've been kind of interested in this kind of relationship between image making and architecture for a long time. I work as a teacher in a Konstfack, a University of Arts, Craft and Design, and of course, being a teacher in architecture, you talk a lot about representation, modes of representations, how to do things. This is the craft and the skill that we teach our students, but we also have critical discussions about that. So I've always been interested in kind of the technology and the history of this relationship in architecture. And working with AI, it's a tool that is very available for everyone. On these kind of the tools I've been using and the communities I've been looking at, these are examples from this just this week. This is the top of the month best images according to this AI community. So we see here a kind of an aesthetics that I think it's quite far removed from the aesthetics that we teach and talk and discuss in the School of Architecture. But it's also interesting, the willingness to share not only imagery, but also how they've been done and how they have used the technology. And that's something that I have been learning quite a lot from. So I've been hanging out in these kind of forums and using these image generators now for a couple of years. Hence the AI specialist mentioned. Anyway, but also maybe I would say something, which is that I think that a lot of examples in AI that is very interesting has been using, you could use the technique that you could make your own database and from that create a model that in turn creates this imagery, or you can use this kind of more popular available imagery, and they use models that are based on billions of photos, mostly harvested from the internet. And I found this kind of filter from these billions of images of a kind of a collective, I don't know, emerging consciousness of imagery, kind of interesting. So, but it also, of course, deeply impacts the kind of images you do. It's like you filter them through like all images on the internet, basically. So that influences the project in the end. Anyway, let's see. So as Jes said in the beginning, I set up a process where I've been interviewing 5 kind of stakeholders in this project. So it's Lena Sjöstrand and Mats Persson from the church, Åsa Bjärndell and Jake Ford from White Architects, and Jes, who has been working as a curator, and you presented some of the work you've done. And it was set up in a way, so it was a 1 hour and a 15-minute conversation about Råängen, but it was kind of located in the future. So I asked people, so now you sit here at the end of your career looking back. So what can you tell me about the early days of Råängen? What was it that worked? How, what was these materials that you saw and so on? So that was a way how to kind of trick people to look at the project from another vantage point. In order to, because then you can also talk not only about what you hope it will be, but also, why it didn't work or how it worked. So it was like opening up for a different kind of discussion. But anyway, those interviews, I recorded them, I transcribed them. So that in the end, it was like 180 pages of interviews with material. And then I used AI as well in ChatGPT to sort of find patterns in these, or look for common things and common threads and so on. And those kind of fell out in kind of key themes. And they were, as you can see here, first inhabitants, use of material, experimental farming, new public space, architecture of transcendence, and the relation between social activities, architecture, and time. They were topics that came up in many of the talks. And it came from, here you see some examples, like from excerpts from the interview. So things that that participants said according to these things. So these are outtakes from the kind of interviews, and they then provided a kind of a foundation for a collective idea about what this project could be, or hopes and desires, or fears maybe of these kind of projects. Then those texts were then also combined with available photographs from the projects. These were things I found on the website, like official pictures taken from the project. Some of them was also in your presentation, Jes. So it was like to give. So this also became like a database. So these interviews and texts combined with these images then fell out in these kind of image prompts. So the way you control AI is like you write something and then it feeds you back examples of images, like 4 images in often. Also it says here with the reverse engineering, so I can feed the system with an image from one of these existing images, and it brings up then like a text, like what does the machine see? So it thinks now that there is a wall in the style of David Chipperfield. I don't know how it interpreted that or where that came from, but that's examples of that. And this together then fell out into these kind of images. And yes, that's an example of this would be, you see the first prompt, the style reference photo. This is like coming together. And this is kind of one of the results of this. So the image prompt the text together with the parts of the photographs or a combination of the photographs, ended up in these kind of things. So it's things that are, and they are then filtered through this model of billions of images. So it was kind of a conceptual process, and then of course I tweak things and add things, and but more than anything else, I also edit. I work as an editor, you could say. So it's like I have made thousands of images from Råängen, and then when I see something I react to or intuitively like or think resonates with me, or then I try to develop that and make more images like that. And then there is a selection. So it's like selecting, and also to think quite a lot of reflecting on the images as well. And it's like, what society is this? Who lives here? What do they do? What kind of society would build spaces like this? So that became something interesting. I also liked this kind of activities of people constructing things, and that was also a theme that came up in the interviews. And I think it's also something that Råängen has been about. First we build something, then people move in and activities form. That informs the project. We build something, another part that informs, and so it becomes like a dynamic process of making and sort of, rather than just drawing and laying out a plan, which I found fascinating. So going through some of these images, I will be like a film now, so we allow for the discussion. But so this kind of thinking of people building, making things, being engaged, working on something. So there became all these projects of people kind of engaged in some sort of activity connected to building, that I found, these images I found interesting, like everyday images of something going on, like this kind of, and I think it's also, I think you can, like, I don't know if you can sense it, but there is a kind of a something of a South Swedish landscape in the background. So that was also something I used quite a lot. Experiments and working together, kind of materiality and using things around you, plotting and scheming and planning together, engaged in sort of different cultural activities in spaces that came in with the church things that came up from the interviews, building things. And here maybe this could be informed by this bit experimental farming, so people doing something in the structure in the landscape, unclear a little bit what they're doing. But these kind of activities of people working together, forming some kind of new structures, maybe even having invented new materials or combination of materials that we don't know what they are already. They were kind of intriguing to me, this kind of on people being on the way of doing something. And then another track that I found interesting, and there is a kind of a materiality already connected to Råängen through these images, through the Hage project and so on. And that was also something that was kind of interesting to follow and try to see where that leads. So there was a series of imagery where kind of materialities came to the fore that could inform perhaps ideas of how a community could look or be planned. There was also a connection, how to connect to already existing structures, how to connect to the history of the landscape and the history of the of the south of Sweden that I think is visible in some of these imagery. Kind of also seeing kind of landscaping, or what could spaces in between buildings be in terms of other kinds of materialities that we would see. So these becomes things that could be a starting point, I think, or a departure for a new way of thinking. What kind of material experience a neighborhood would be, for instance, and that's something that also became one part of this kind of new materialities, you could say, or imagining new kind of public spaces. I think this kind of walled garden that was Hage is also an imagery that has coming back quite a lot, and there's been a lot of talk about allotment gardens, or people being engaged in growing things. And I like some of these imagery where it feels kind of a bit wild, or is like a kind of a landscaping that is not so tidy, but rather kind of temporary, and maybe some things that grow has taken over. So it's a kind of also a fascinating idea about landscaping, I would say. And a combination of this, there's something here about I think about local materials, preservation of what is already there, a combination of nature that is kind of, I think, fascinating for me to see this kind of dreaming of how the machine dreams up these things. A lot of talk about how to use the spaces, maybe what high-rise buildings together with allotment gardens could be. And I think there's something with which AI is very good at. It's creating this kind of detailed foreground, you could say. Like here, the architecture is almost invisible, and it becomes much more about the activities, for instance, the life that is led. So it's something which also can be, of course, from a developer's point of view, completely frightening. What is this? Is this the end of the world, or what are we suggesting here? But kind of maybe processes interrupted, perhaps, and new ways of life seeping in or taking over. So it's a kind of, I like these images also, which was when things were on its way of being built. So there is is the construction going on, or has it been stopped, or what has happened here? It's like a in between, not so much focusing on a finished product, but rather on life taking over, you could say. So these are all examples of that. There was a lot of kids involved in the projects, and quite a lot of imagery of kids, as you showed, Jes, and that's also something about how to make space for them, and what kind of street would you want if you're 5 years old. I think here there are some examples of kind of a nightmare for adults, but a paradise for children, perhaps. So that's also a topic. So maybe something to say, it's like, what is difficult and tricky and a really big obstacle with like AI is that I know that there was a lot of talk about like a diverse community and representation of who is in this kind of imagery, and the way that the images is done, it's like it's sourced from like billions of imagery. And unfortunately, if you put south of Sweden and so on, you also get like a certain selection of kids. So the way to change that is that you have to force the prompts and write kind of people of color, or you have to drive that, then it's also kind of, I don't know, it becomes you're there kind of steering a little bit. So I've stayed away from those images in these examples, but I think it's a really important topic to raise and to discuss. Anyway, so this of some of the final imagery here, sort of the imagination of, you know, almost like pioneers here. Clearly, there are references to projects that has been done, Nathan's project, for instance, in this, but also taken over people. So kind of, who are these pioneers of the Råängen project, and where are they heading? And perhaps this kind of ideas of time, where it's can be difficult. Where do we locate an image? Often we think like a visionary image or a CGI image of a project. It's often, it's 1 week after the opening, when everything is pristine and perfect and the light is lovely and so on. But I think with AI, there is an opportunity to have imagery that we don't know. Like maybe this is 1,000 years from now, when something has happened and that we don't know of now, and this is the you know, leftovers from the Råängen project in the future.
Thank you, Tor. That was perfect. I love this idea of the questioning how the machine dreams, and maybe we need to think about how humans dream. Lena, I just want to give you an opportunity to respond to Tor's images, and then Mia, and then we can have a conversation between us.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you, Tor, for your presentation. We came to you with a question about how to represent our project in images, and we wanted something that was more of a question and a statement, more provocative than sugar-coated. And we were a little bit terrified about all the happy images about future architecture. And you came back to us with those images, and we reacted in very many different ways. We saw dystopia and were frightened, and we saw beauty and care and hope for the future. And for me, it is an important difference between optimism and hope. And it makes sense to think about that when we think about how to talk about future and reflect on these images. So optimism is based on what we already know. It's a kind of general sense that things will be better and better. But hope is something else. It is more than what we know here and now. It's given to us, it comes to us from the outside, and it involves something of the unknown. And to embrace hope, you have to leap into the unfamiliar and let yourself be surprised. And I would say that your images made us take such a leap, and we were surprised. I also think that it is interesting not to only talk about utopia or dystopia, or perhaps we could use something called protopia. That is something that people start to talk about nowadays. It's a kind of society which human takes realistic approaches to things that's happening around, and it's kind of gradual life towards a better world. So that's kind of background for my reflections on the images. So the images brought me back to my childhood. Small, special public places, glades in the woods, old cars and machines half covered by greenery, secretive. The possibility to be alone and to play in freedom also with that which is not meant to be played with. Places for fantasy. In the images, I see people who are concentrated, involved in doing things, involvement in action in a meditative state of mind. I come to think about the sociologist Hartmut Rosa and what he says about resonance as a responsive relationship to the world. Nature, transcendence, another person, life itself are given to us and creates resonance in us. We respond to everything around us in a mutual relationship. And the quality of human life cannot be measured simply in terms of resources, options, moments of happiness. Instead, we must consider our relationship to, our resonance with the world in all its complexity. And I think that is true also when you think about a new city or about the future. And how could images and stories inspire creativity and resonance? As a priest, I work with liturgy and rituals. They are kind of open-ended stories. The structure is given, we receive and embody and step into the structures. The word we say and sing are our own, but not only our own individual words. Something bigger takes over. They are not designed to radically change at any one moment, but we contribute to that which is given. And over time, you can see changes and mutual influences. Perhaps this kind of liturgy thoughts could be helpful when we think about images for the future. We step into a story that is given, and we don't change it overnight, but perhaps we take it steps further, and there will be influences which is grounded in this resonance to everything that is around us. So that was just a short reflection before Mia takes over and we step into the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lena. That was beautiful. Mia.
Thank you, Tor, and thank you, Lena. I just have to say to everyone that I'm a filmmaker. I have no education at all when it comes to architecture. And also I was invited to this talk. I didn't know anything about Råängen, so you have to excuse me if I'm talking about things that you have already discussed earlier. But in my filmmaking, I've been working a lot with the urban landscape and its relation to time and memory. And I have especially been filming in Paris and Stockholm. But I've also been working in big cities in, for example, New York and San Francisco. And during these 30 years that I have been a filmmaker, all these big cities have gone through similar processes of quite violent gentrification, I would say. And many of the common spaces that we used to have together, to do things together, they have been commercialized. So Stockholm is a very good example. So the inner city has become very white, very rich, and also very expensive. If you want to spend time with friends, you have to go to a restaurant and pay. You go to a cafe and you pay very expensive coffee. You go shopping together, you go to a gym together and you pay, and your role in society becomes just the role of a consumer. And I think these images, I think it's funny, Lena, that you say that they made you think about your childhood, because actually they made me think about my youth too, because in the 90s when I was living in Paris, I was part of the alternative punk rock scene. So I was playing in band and we were having big squats, big areas, buildings, but also neighborhoods that were squats. That is, that we didn't pay rent, but they were going to tear them down or renovate. And these spaces was occupied by people. And we were making food together, we were making music together and making art and also activism. And it was a place where people from different classes and backgrounds could meet. Homeless people could have soup, and people that didn't have anywhere to stay, they could stay there. But also people like me with ambition who wanted to change the world and make art, we could all meet there and do things together without buying anything. And I think these images, I think they were so inspiring because I think it was like a mixture of the past and the future, like Christiania and Blade Runner. I think it's a beautiful vision of the future. And I think as a filmmaker, I think when we make images of the future, we have to be brave and also include scenarios where everything is not perfect. I mean, we might not have everything that we have today. Maybe we don't have clean air. Maybe we have to do urban farming because we don't have any other food. I mean, many things can happen. And I think when we visualize the future, we have to take in also dirt and dysfunction and diversity and the dynamics that are parts of life. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, that was lovely. Yeah, I think there's so much in there. It's such a lovely kind of parallel world that you talk about, Christiana and Blade Runner. It's beautiful. And I too was thinking when I looked at your images, Tor, about my childhood, and I was thinking, is it just a kind of inbuilt mechanism of being human that you start becoming nostalgic for your childhood that actually maybe wasn't so great and you weren't, you know, endlessly happy and digging around in the ground and having a great kind of private time? But I was thinking about how, Tor, that we create futures using a kind of nostalgic idea of the past, and whether that was dangerous or not, or whether you feel that there's something, do you feel that there's a sense of, I guess for me, we could almost all be the same generation to a certain degree, that we're thinking about the 70s, where you get this sense of sort of hippie vibe, communal living. But I'm wondering if everyone feels like that at every point in history, that their past was somehow more free than the current world, and certainly the future.
Well, I think, and like in doing a project like this, you could, like, how much do you control? What is fascinating with AI is that it's very difficult to control. So it's kind of opposite the kind of tool you want to have as an architect, because normally we want precision. We want things to be precise, you know, because that's how we think of our our drawings. There shouldn't be any questions left. Everything should be on the paper before we go to the building site. So there is as little margins for errors as possible. And that's also true, I think, seeps in the way we make imagery in a way. So to chaos or life, disturbance, it's very unarchitectural, I could say. So that it was a struggle, but also for me fascinating with a machine where I find it's kind of, if you give in and allow it, often people talk about AI imagery like the machine dreaming or machine hallucinating, and of course these are not very good terms to do this, but they also pinpoint a bit, because the result you get back is so strange, and it's so volatile, like it can be hard to reproduce. For instance, you see these kind of images of people, and then I get fascinated. What is this couple doing? So I want to see more of their life. But as soon as I try to do that, they disappear and other people emerge. They are always only there. I can never reproduce them, which I think is also a fascinating side product of this machinery. But of course, when doing this, I influence a lot of this.
Yeah.
And I have been thinking about playgrounds and children's place in the city quite a lot. And I think it was also part of this imagery from the workshops of kids working not in a playground, but actually working with soil, loose material. And that was something that was very popular and had a big search in the 70s. So this kind of bygglekplatser or adventure playgrounds, they were a big thing around the 68 to 78, say, and has kind of disappeared. But I found this interesting. So as soon as things like that came up, I sort of pushed these things because I had this kind of interest in childhood, and I think it sort of evoked things that were part of my childhood in the early 70s.
Yeah, so it is authored. I mean, that's the important point. You are absolutely the selector, the orchestrator. It's not just a case of harvesting information. You are
precisely
these images. Yeah. Mia, you wanted to say
Yeah,
something?
but I think also we have to remember that AI, well, it's nice to think that AI has an imagination, but it's actually based on human memory in a way. It's a common bank of visual memories in a way. So actually maybe it's just normal that we think about the past, because in a way it is a bank of the past, a memory bank that is creating AI images so far.
But the thing that's really disturbing about it is it's not neutral. Like as Tor was saying, it has absolutely a way of kind of veering towards one type of imagery as opposed to another. And that's where it becomes political. And that's where I think your quote at the beginning of your presentation with Lebeas Wood, I think it was, about how the importance of architecture becoming political and making statements. And this is what drives me nuts about so much of architecture being on the fringes of it, is that it's not willing to be political and make those statements of a critique and be honest about the future. And that's what I find so beguiling about these images, is their honesty. When we look at most AI images, they're not honest. There's a sort of sense of, you might be harvesting from the past, but it's absolutely selective, and I think deeply problematic in many ways.
I think what Lena said was quite beautiful, and I think it's also not only political but also spiritual. That the church is in this process of creating a part of a city. I think that is also an important part when you look at these images. I think there's a spiritual idea with Råängen and these places where people can meet, and I think it's very religious in a way. It doesn't have to be Christian, but I mean it's a religious atmosphere of this idea, almost like in paradise, when people are standing with their feet on the ground and playing together in the mud.
Yeah, and I would say that could be something of our longing, kind of longing back. It must not be longing to our first time. It could be longing to something general, very early, that come before all the hard things come into time. And I can see that. I can see a transcendence in the images, both going backwards, but also going into the future and to something spiritual and very big. For this kind of special church building that comes, some of the images is very special, and it is rooted in soil, but it also is heightened in a certain way. And that, I think that was very interesting to see in the images, because that is something that we have been talking a lot about, but it's much easier in a way to think about mud and to think about spiritual things. And yeah, and you asked questions about that, Tor, I remember in the interviews, and you stressed a little, press me, say something about transcendence. What do you think about that?
I also think sometimes when we talk, I teach a lot in film schools and art schools, like what is the difference between design and art? And we used to say that designers, they solve problems, and artists, they create problems. And I think that's also interesting that you're collaborating with artists in this early process, because I think that's important way to deepen the idea of human life in architecture, to also create problems.
Exactly, and that's something. Yeah, I mean, no doubt we've been doing that, and it's uncomfortable, isn't it, Lena? There are moments where we feel we're not quite sure what we've created or what we're doing. We have a deep sense and understanding that we're going to fail. And I guess, we're sort of doing the opposite of a lot of development projects in that we're not playing this CGI game, this is the conclusion. Tor, the image that you finished on, I thought was really beautiful in terms of opening up that type of methodology that we have within the Råängen program, this idea that you have to leave space for the imagination, and there has to be an understanding that there's all sorts of other ideas and conversations that are welcome, and then we're not stating any type of conclusion. And Lena, I remember you said something about that in terms of Tor's image choice yesterday. I wondered if you just wanted to develop on that, the idea that that image gives us the opportunity to think in different ways, and not to sort of tie things together like we usually do.
Yeah, I think that is very important, that it opens up for different interpretations and associations. And if you go into a project, and now we have been working for quite a long time, there's a risk that you try to control it and you know everything and you would like to come to conclusions. And of course, we have to do that also. But it's also a danger if we just stop processes. So I think everything that could open and make us inspire us to see there's different ways of thinking, different ways of interpretation, and that will be important for this new part of the city. So because we are talking a lot about how could we build for more than ourselves, and if we just stick to our own images and all thoughts and all our own hopes, it will just be for us. So how could we let in provocation and the things that we have not experienced?
Yeah, that was super interesting what you said, Tor, about the idea of this AI community being open and becoming a kind of accessible unit that other people could feed into in a way that I think architects are absolutely not like, there isn't a sort of sense of the same type of openness. I really like that. But I just wanted to, before we throw it open to any questions, I just wanted to ask about your view of reality, all of you, or whoever wants to respond. I think this question comes up a lot now because of the introduction of AI and CGI and alternative realities. It's like, what's real and what isn't real? And I have this view that everything is real. There's a material weight to digital, binary numbers. They're all stored in offshore, huge tons. They're a guzzling machine for energy. But and Mia, with one of your films, I know there was a whole conversation about, is this a real relationship? Did this actually happen? And one of the characters even said, what was real in our relationship? So I just wondered if you wanted to say anything, Mia or Lena or Tor, about this idea of creating a different future if we manufacture alternative future realities, and that relationship to reality in that discussion.
I think already when you have done the film or the image, it's no longer reality. It's an image. So already it's not an objective truth anymore. And I think, like in the film industry, we've been working with CGI and fake images forever. I mean, film is fake. so there's no, I think AI is just I don't see it as a threat. It's just a continuation of what is already there. I think we should be more aware of images all over, not only AI images, but all images. What do they tell us, and who is telling this, and what does it make to us? So that's my point of view of the AI discussion. Yeah.
That's really interesting. The fact that obviously film is a sort of precursor to AI.
And darkness, you've been working with darkness, Mia. And I think darkness is of great importance because that is the place, the space between where I have time to reflect on my own and let images come not just from outside, but also from my inner life. So, and the gap between what we call reality and another reality is a super interesting place to be in, because that is a place where new things can happen. And I would say that prayer and religious life has a very strong dimension of that. You imagine things, but you know that you don't know everything, and you would like to be in this open field between known and unknown, and the bigger thing. So I think that the real risk is if we think that we can handle and control reality and know what it is. So more gaps, more darkness, more open space for reflection and creativity.
I think maybe there's also something about materiality that I've been thinking of. As an architect, I spend most days in front of a screen interacting with the keyboard and a mouse, and materiality is something that is digital, and it can be expressed in different ways, either very abstract or more photorealistic, but it's seldom realistic. So I also interact then with moving my finger over a glass, this kind of, there is a materiality. I'm actually looking at the screen right now, and there is a phone here, and it's like this materialities, and perhaps there's something subconscious in these kind of images, which is a longing to be engaged in a material world in a way, and there is a kind of a distance there. And I think as an architect, you have a tendency that we are seldom allowed to be out on location because it's too time consuming and we can't afford it. So there is a kind of an economic incentive to sit by the computer like as much as possible. And I feel it's a bit of a fear. What do we become as architects if we only engage through like a digital interface? I think that's something I've been thinking about when I'm going through these images. It's a bit like I'm longing to be in the images, like in this materiality. But I am, in fact, not in the mud. I am by the computer working through interfaces, which is a kind of strange split in a way. And but maybe it's also something that you could see that seeps in all this kind of imagery. The system is very good at making representations of materialities. That's something it's very skilled, in the same way as it becoming very skilled in making something that comes almost alive, like human faces, for instance, because it's also what it has trained on. There is so much imagery of material, and it's so much imagery of faces. So the machine can become very good at representing that. But it's at the same time, the closer it comes to reality, the furthest away it is. This kind of, it's opening up an abyss of absolute distance in this kind of reality. And I find that, I don't know, it's like a scary, for me, it's like a scary movement, but you're drawn to it. Like you were drawn to darkness, Mia, and I'm drawn to this kind of, that before representation was always it's clear that it's representation. Now it's like, was this built, or, like, do we need to build it?
We have to learn bodily how to understand it.
Yeah, one thing that I was thinking when I was looking at the pictures, the people in the images, no one is looking at the screen. And my son, he asked me a few years ago when he was smaller, he said, but he couldn't believe that I didn't have a computer or phone when I was a kid. And he was like, but what were you doing? And I was like, we were outside playing in the mud.
Exactly.
And I think everyone in our society, and that's why I also feel more and more hesitant about my job as a filmmaker. Maybe we don't need any more images. We just need to close our eyes and be in the darkness, or go out and in the mud.
And of course there is a fear of, like, the way kids interact in the world today. They spend a lot of time on screens and with computer games, and they are drawn to that world, but they don't play like this kind of real play where you don't go to a playground and you just go through sit on the swing and go to the bouncy thing, or go down the slide and then we go home, but play where you are outside and imagination takes control and you're led into like a fantasy.
that's where I think I disagree with you, and you used that word real as well. That's not real play.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
I would say that you know, a 12-year-old would say this is completely real, and
Yes,
it's
of course.
great what I'm doing. I'm talking to my mates, you know, but my kids over lockdown spent their
Yeah.
lives on, you know, they're in their real world.
Yeah.
I think it's
Now
just
that's probably true, but I'm thinking this was if you this kind of different kind of play then what like what will happen with kids that grow up and has played that way opposed to the like other like, and I guess that for most people in the world, most children in the world, play is still, you know, something that has always been around, and it's probably practiced in that way.
Okay, could I just have a quick this might be inappropriate, but I think I read that the young generation today is the first generation in hundreds of years that have less sex than the past generations. I don't talk about children, of course, but like young adults and teenagers, they have less sex than their fathers and their grandfathers and their grandgrandfathers had in their age, because they spend so much time on social media. So it's more important to be sexy in the image than to have sex. So that's
And
a
now-
consequence of
Now we come to God, because I would say that the whole story, if you read the Bible as a story, it is a story about God longing for human beings, for bodily life, for incarnation. And you might say that the cathedral is built as a response to this longing through everything. It's this love that makes everything exists. And I would say that if we are longing for materiality, there will be that will be met with by God, who is longing for being part of the world and time, and still be something else. So it might be a dimension from the cathedral that has sipped into the images into our talk today. Who knows?
well, I'm delighted we've got sex and God in there right at the end. Okay, so we have one question here, which Tor, I think, is more sort of technical in relation to your prompt. So is it possible to find out what the original prompt of an image is, as in a reverse reading of the image?
Well, I think what you could what you can do is that you can feed an image into the system and get a prompt out. Well, that is what the machine reading of what this is. So it's like an interpretation in text, what it sees in the image, you could say. And then, of course, when I do images, all the prompts are always part of the information. You know, so on the way I interact with them, so I can go back and find prompts connected to a specific image. But if you reverse engineer it, it will not be the precise prompt that was set in. I don't that's or I haven't managed that, at least, or encountered it. So
okay, thank you. And yeah, we've got another 5 minutes, and if anyone has any questions or responses, please put them in the chat. And in fact, if you just have one word as a response to these images, that would be great. If we just got a whole series of, you know, one words of what these images make you feel, because we're really interested in the range. I think so far it's been really very, very broad. But before we sign off, I just want all three of you, I've asked you all to recommend a book or a film that you think might take this conversation further, for the people listening and for all of us in the team. I think a book or a podcast or a film or whatever. I'll start with you, Mia, if that's okay. You take yourself off mute.
I'm sorry, could you take me last?
Oh, of course, yeah, no worries. Lena, can I go to you?
Yeah, I came to think about a Danish writer, Inge Christensen, and her alphabet, or when she, because in words she brings together things that doesn't seem to be related to one another, and she makes it in a very strong structure and with rhythm and rhymes and so on. So that was what I first came to think about.
Gorgeous. I'm going to look that up. Like this idea of different dissonance or different things being put together. Tor, what about you?
Well, I was thinking of there is a British author called China Melville who wrote a book called The City and the City. I think it's called The City and the City, and it's like a crime story, but it's played out in a world or in a city where there are two different cities that exist on top of each other here, and then you learn as a citizen not to see the other city. It's illegal to see the other city. So you train yourself in order to it doesn't become part of your perception. So it's a learned behavior. And of course, as a book, it's kind of amazing because in fiction, we can combine these things. So it becomes possibility, even though it's never explained how it's being done. And then suddenly one of the detectives sees a crime in the other world and he tries to interact. And it becomes an image of how we live separate lives, how we live together, but also apart. So it becomes a part of discussing phenomena that I think are part of every, like the problematics of the city, how we connect to each other and how we group and so on. And there's something, to me, there is something about this and AI, I would say, this kind of virtual real divide that I find fascinating.
Gorgeous. I'm immediately going to go and check that out. And it's made me think of Naomi Klein's Doppelganger, which came out about a year ago, which is very much based on this idea of mirroring and having a sort of separate identity. And you were talking about separate cities, I think, and that relates so much to our idea of social media and reality. Which, so that's my recommendation. Mia, can we go to
Yes, I would like to recommend a book called In Praise of Shadows.
Oh, I love that book. Yes.
Yeah, by the Japanese architect Junichiro Tanizaki, who he wrote it in the 30s actually, and it's about the idea of including the darkness and the shadows in architecture. And he means that modern architecture and Western architecture, we just our buildings and our way of organizing our cities, it's connected just to the light and lightning. But he means that there's too much lightning and we need to include darkness and shadows in the way we organize our lives. In Praise of Shadows.
Beautiful book. I absolutely love it. Yeah. Thank you so much, all of you. This is really lovely. And I'm gonna, my takeaway for today, well, obviously the conversation has been so rich and fantastic, but is a quote from Lena, from what you were saying, Lena: more gaps, more dreams, more open space for creativity. I think that's really, really beautiful. We're actually right on time now. Fantastic. If anyone wants to, someone asked in the chat earlier how we can follow the project. Sign up to our newsletter on our website. That's how you can hear about all of our activities. If you're on Instagram, we are too. So Råängen. As I said in my introduction, we make films, we do publications, we have events. There's a whole range of different things. It's quite slow because we've got this 2,000-year framework, which is quite handy. Like not massive manic activity, but yeah, hopefully over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, we'll see sort of accretion, the layers of the story extend. So I just want to thank our speakers so much, Mia, especially for trusting in us. It's just been such a joy to have you part of the programme and hopefully on into the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Lena, for your incredible words and ongoing inspiration of the project.
Thank you.
And Tor, for your, really great, I mean, you sent us down this immediately strange, potentially disturbing and hopeful, brilliant path. And it's just been so useful. All the questions are coming in now, as you can imagine, just before we say goodbye. Will there be an invitation to architects to imagine the actual next stage of the project? Yes, is the answer to that. The very brief. In fact, architects are now involved. So Jake Ford and also Burndale at White Architecture are working with many architects on this project, including Flores and Prats from Barcelona. But that's another whole story. So thank you all, everyone. You've been absolutely brilliant speakers. I really enjoyed that. It was so brilliant. And lots of people are coming in saying thank you. That was really rich conversation and etc. So thank you very much to everyone, and keep following us and joining us for the next discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.